The Sign of Four by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Let's see something about our author. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was born on 22nd May 1859 in Scotland, was a physician by profession but was better known as the creator of much-loved private detective Sherlock Holmes. The Sherlock Holmes detective series, which went on to become a milestone in crime fiction, was started by Doyle with the publication of A Study in Scarlet in 1887. His works include science fiction and fantasy stories, as well as humorous stories about Napoleonic soldier Brigadier Gerard. Doyle also wrote plays, poetry, non-fiction, and historical novels. Doyle was not only a prolific writer but also a journalist, an avid sportsperson, creator of Peter Pan, and goalkeeper of football club under pseudonym A.C. Smith. Doyle coined the term license to kill when he received his diploma for his Bachelor of Medicine and Master of Surgery degrees. This term later became popular to describe James Bond, another famous detective and spy. Doyle died on 7th July 1930. Major characters: Sherlock Holmes, a brilliant private detective; Sir John Watson, a retired army officer, physician, friend, and roommate of Sherlock Holmes; Mary Morstan, a young lady who is the client of Holmes in the story; Major Sholto, an army officer, friend of late Captain Morstan and father of twin brothers Bartholomew and Thaddeus; Captain Arthur Morstan, father of Mary Morstan, whose unexplained disappearance and deaths forms the catalyst for this novel; Jonathan Small and Tonga, a gatekeeper of Agra Fort who helped three Arabs to steal treasure, and Tonga, a native of Andaman Islands attempting to recover the Agra treasure, accomplice of Small; Thaddeus Sholto, son of Major Sholto, an eccentric gentleman; Bartholomew Sholto, son of Major Sholto and twin brother of Thaddeus, who is murdered by Tonga for the treasure. Now let's go through outline of the novella. Detective Sherlock Holmes and his friend Dr. Watson are engaged in a discussion in Holmes' Baker Street in a living room. A young woman, Mary Morstan, arrives at his home and requests Holmes' advice on a strange matter. She tells them that her father had disappeared under mysterious circumstances more than 10 years ago. She then began to receive a large pearl in the mail every year on the same day. She proceeds to tell them of a letter she had recently received instructing her to go to the Lyceum Theatre. The letter cautions her not to inform the police, but she could be accompanied by two friends. Information contained in the letter suggests that Mary has been the victim of a great injustice. While Holmes and Watson agreed to accompany her, Watson and Mary find themselves attracted to one another. As the group of three reaches the Lyceum Theatre, they are approached by a man who checks whether there are any policemen in their group and then requests them to board a carriage which whisks them away to a strange house in a poorer locality in London. In this strange house, they meet an eccentric gentleman named Thaddeus Sholto, who reveals certain things about Mary's father and his disappearance. He informs them that Mary's father has died, making her an heir to a great hidden treasure. Thaddeus further explains that Mary's father had always lived in fear of men with wooden legs and was known to strike any stranger with that appearance. Thaddeus continues that his own father, Major Sholto, upon his deathbed, had confided in his sons, Thaddeus and Bartholomew, about the existence of a treasure. Sadly, before he could reveal the location of the treasure, a bearded face appeared at their window, causing their father to die of a heart attack. However, before he died, the old man had made his sons promise that they would share the treasure with Mary Mostyn. The morning after his death, a note was found on his body. It read, "Sign of foe." Thaddeus diverges that after having searched for the treasure for many years, his brother Bartholomew had finally discovered its location after a hidden attack in the family house. That was the reason he had sent for Mary, and he entered the three of them to accompany him to his family estate, where he intends to divide the fortune and give Mary her rightful share. A while later, they arrive at the family estate to find a frightened housekeeper who informs them that Bartholomew had locked himself in his room and not emerged from within the entire day. Holmes and Watson peered through the keyhole and see only the unnaturally grinning face of Bartholomew. They break open the door to find that Bartholomew has been poisoned by a thorn that pierced his neck. Upon further investigation, Holmes reveals that the person responsible for the murder was a person with a wooden leg. The murderer had been accompanied by a very intriguing individual. Holmes also deduced that the murderers appeared to have stolen the Agra treasure. In their escape, the wooden-legged man seemed to have stepped on creosote. This enabled Holmes and Watson to follow their scent using a dog. This search leads them to the banks of the river Thames, where it became apparent that the murderers had escaped on a boat. Holmes uses his Baker Street irregulars, a group of young urchins, to trace the boat. When they fail, Holmes himself traces the camouflaged boat, the Aurora. Holmes, Watson, and several police officers followed the Aurora in a police boat. They finally overtake the boat to discover a wooden-legged captain named Jonathan Small and his small pygmy companion Tonga from the Andaman Islands. Tonga attempts to shoot Holmes with a poisoned blowpipe, but Holmes and Watson shoot him down. The Aurora runs aground and Small's wooden leg gets stuck in the mud, leading to his capture. This group brings Jonathan Small and an iron box which had been found on the boat to Holmes' Baker Street residence. Captain Small then proceeds to narrate the story of the Agra treasure. The story began when Small had been stationed as a gatekeeper of the fortress in India. He had been approached by 3 Arab guards who offered him a share of a great treasure if he would help them to murder the man who was carrying the treasure. Small agreed to help them, and when the emissary from the wealthy sheikh arrived carrying the treasure, Small blocked his way, allowing the 3 Arab guards to murder him. The 4 of them then hid the treasure but were subsequently arrested for the murder of the emissary. Captain Small had been sent to a penal colony on the Andaman Islands, where he befriended a local, the native Tonga. The latter had been saved by Small from a terrible illness, after which he became loyal companion of Jonathan Small. Major Sholto and Captain Mostyn, Mary's father, were guards on the island, and Small offered them share in the treasure if they would help him escape the place. Sholto offered to bring back the treasure, but when he did not return, it became apparent that he had betrayed Small and decided to keep the treasure for himself. It was then that Small took the help of Tonga and escaped from the island. Years later, Small managed to track down Sholto as he lay on his deathbed. It was Small who had fixed the note to Major Sholto's body, a reference to himself and his 3 Arab companions, that is, the sign of 4. It was Tonga who murdered Bartholomew, and together he and Small stole the treasure. Jonathan Small concludes by informing them that he had thrown the treasure into the river Thames. He was then taken to prison. With no treasure between them, Watson felt free to confess his love for Mary Mostyn. Now let's see the theme of the novella. The theme of The Sign of 4 revolves around a treasure from Agra in India. The existence of the treasure drives the plot of the story. Its appearance results in tragic deaths and disappearances of those who come in contact with it. The removal of the treasure is essential for the lives of the characters in the story to return to normalcy. Mary Mostyn, a young and charming woman, approached private detective Sherlock Holmes to find the stolen Agra treasure and solve the mystery of her father's disappearance. She believes in herself to be an heir to her father's fortune. Dr. Watson, Holmes' partner and roommate, is attracted to Mary but is prevented from proposing to her in case she thinks he is after her money. When it is discovered as the story unfolds that the treasure no longer exists, Watson comfortably asks for Mary's hand in marriage. The pervading concept of the destructive nature of wealth and greed is clearly visible in the story. The Agra treasure, in one way or other, affects almost every character in the story. Bartholomew and the Sheikh's emissary are murdered for the treasure, while Tonga is killed attempting to flee after having stolen the treasure. Thaddeus and his father, Major Sholto, because of their early experience with the treasure, remained paranoid and fearful of strangers, and in particular of a man with a wooden leg. Unlike most of Doyle's other detective stories, The Sign of 4 provides us with romance in background throughout through romantic conflict for Watson, whose attraction for Mary cannot be fulfilled. Now let's see synopsis of the extract. We have chapter 2 of this novel for studying. State of the case begins with a young, dainty but surprisingly composed lady with impeccable taste ushered into the Baker Street residence living room of Holmes, a private detective currently engaged in conversation with his partner and roommate Dr. Watson. The most striking aspect of Lady Miss Mary Mostyn is the simplicity and plainness of her bearing, suggesting limited means. Her attire was sober, a greyish beige dress without any trimming or braiding on her head. She wore a dull-coloured small turban with a barely visible white feather at the side. Mary Mostyn narrates the incidents that have brought her to Sherlock. Her father had disappeared several years before while on a trip. Some years later, an advertisement in a local newspaper had asked Mary for her address, after which Mary began to receive a rare and expensive pearl on the same day every year by mail. This happened for many years until Mary received a letter asking her to meet the party that had been sending these letters. It was this letter that had brought Mary to meet Holmes, since it contained a warning not to bring the police, but she could bring along two friends. Mary requests Holmes to accompany her in order to help unravel the secret behind the letter. Holmes includes Watson in the plan. Holmes leaves for the office of the Times to do some research and to refer some facts pertaining to the case, while suggesting Dr. Watson to read a book. On his return from the Times office, Holmes briefs Dr. Watson on his findings. Major Sholto, who had been a friend of Mary's father, had died, and his death was in some way connected to the mysterious delivery of the rare pearls, which Mary had been receiving for the past several years. It appeared that Major Sholto's heirs were in some way connected to Mary and felt that Mary had been wronged and attempted to rectify the wrongdoing. Plans are made for the meeting and Mary returns to Baker Street, and the three of them, Holmes, Watson and Mary, set out to the appointment, where Mary had been called to meet the mysterious stranger. During the journey, Mary hands Holmes a folded scrap of paper which belonged to her father. On this was an undecipherable message which she felt may offer some clues to solve the mystery of her father's disappearance. Holmes examines the piece of paper and puts it away safely. The group reaches the meeting place at Lyceum Theatre. They are approached by a man who, after checking that no police was present, calls a Arab driving a horse-driven wagon. When inside, they travelled at a furious pace to a poorer, seemingly deserted neighbourhood of London. They approach a simple household and are ushered in by a strange-looking Oriental figure who led them to his master. So, this is the synopsis of chapter 2 and 3, which are given to us in our textbook for studies. So, now let's go to the next part, that is the brainstorming portion of this chapter. First, we will see questions based on the element of novel character. Read the extract again and complete the web by highlighting the qualities of the following characters. We have to highlight the qualities of Dr. Watson, Sherlock Holmes and Mary Morstan. Dr. Watson provides a counterbalance to Holmes' extreme nature. A conscientious man, romantic and emotional, obtuse, a good conversationalist, very observant. Sherlock Holmes, he is brisk and businesslike, possessed clear-cut, hawk-like features, showing his ability to be focused. An automation, a calculating machine, inhuman, cold and emotionless, impatient, keenly observant, perfectionist, possesses impenetrable reserve. Mary Morstan, she is sweet and amiable woman, outwardly composed, appears to be very spiritual and sympathetic. Next question. Describe the character of Mary Morstan from Dr. Watson's point of view. Dr. Watson, as the narrator of the story, portrays Mary Morstan as the representative of womankind. He sees her as a typical weak Victorian woman who needs to be protected. Although she lacks beauty, he notices that she is sweet and amiable, and that her blue eyes reflect her spiritual and sympathetic nature. He is emotionally drawn towards her strength of character as the story unfolds, and he finds her to be resolute and collected. Third question based on character. Sherlock Holmes is the leading character in the extract. Explain. Sherlock Holmes is indeed the leading character in the extract. He is highly skilled but eccentric private detective who is known for solving cases that puzzle the police. He is a man of extremes. When he is not solving a case, he is lethargic, addicted to cocaine, and rarely leaves his house except on a case. Once confronted with the mystery of a case, he turns into a workaholic who pursues the clues of the case to the detriment of all things, including his health. Holmes displays extraordinary powers of concentration and sees things that other people easily miss or overlook. Holmes is known to behave like an automation, without any human touch, treating the case and people in a cold, emotionless manner. Although he appears to downplay his skills, his vanity lies in his feats of detention and deduction. Overall, he is a highly conflicted character around whose detective skills the story hinges, making his character central to the story. Next question. Dr. Watson, the narrator, is one of the major characters in the novel Illustrate. Dr. Watson provides a balance to Holmes' extremes of characters. As a narrator of the story, we see the incidents unfolding through his eyes and perspective. Although he describes himself as obtuse, Dr. Watson is quite observant. This is seen from the detailed way in which he provides the description of the setting of the action. We see London through his eyes. Dr. Watson is also a man with a conscience. He disapproves of Holmes' drug habit as well as the inhuman manner in which he treats people. Dr. Watson is one of the major characters, especially because he is a romantic and finds himself attracted to Mary Marston, whom he proposes once the mystery is solved. Next question. Holmes is always one step ahead of Dr. Watson in solving cases. Elucidate. Holmes is a workaholic and thrives on the thrill of the mysteries that he is engaged in. Like a machine, he is cold and calculating, ignoring the feelings of the people around him. Dr. Watson, on the other hand, is a romantic and quite emotional who gets carried away trying to maintain social niceties. This makes him a little slow in identifying the nuances of the clues, which Holmes' astute sense of observation enables him to see. This places Holmes always one step ahead of Dr. Watson when it comes to solving cases. Next question. Describe the qualities of an ideal detective. In order to be a good detective, one must be meticulous, methodical, having keen powers of observation, and be persistent. One should also have good analytical skills and critical thinking. Next question. Do you think Holmes possesses the qualities of an ideal detective? Explain. Of course, yes. Holmes most definitely possesses the qualities of an ideal detective. In fact, he is so focused on the case that he turns to a workaholic and pursues the clues of the case, forgetting about everything else. Now let's go to next element of novel, that is plot. Arrange the sentences in correct sequence as per their occurrence in the extract. 5 sentences are given and we have to put them in correct sequence. So correct sequence is: Mary Marston was a well-dressed lady. Second, Mary's father was an officer in an Indian regiment. Third, Mary received a large and lustrous pearl through the post. Fourth, Holmes gave Winwood's book Martyrdom of Man to Watson. And last one, Holmes put a revolver in his pocket. So this is the correct sequence of events. Discuss the importance of the following statements in the light of the extract. The trio, Holmes, Dr. Watson and Mary, decide to visit Lyceum Theatre. So what is the importance of this statement? Mary had received a letter in the morning of her visit to Sherlock Holmes. The writer of the letter appeared to be the sender of the lustrous pearls which Mary had been regularly receiving for several years prior to that day. The writer addressed Mary as a wronged woman, apparently showing his intention to correct this anomaly. Mary had been summoned to a meeting with the sender of those letters. She was told that she could bring two friends if she was distrustful, but she should not at any cost bring the police. This intrigued her as well as Holmes, who liked a good mystery, and they decided to respond to the letter by visiting the Lyceum Theatre. Next statement, Mary received pearls every year on the same day. Mary is the pivotal character around whom the entire plot revolves. It is the message from her father summoning her to meet him and his mysterious disappearance and death that forms the backdrop of the story. Subsequently, a message appeared in a newspaper for Mary's address, following which every year Mary received a lustrous pearl of the finest variety in the post. This led her to believe that it was part of a large fortune left by her father, making her a wealthy heiress. The pearl serves as a bait for Mary to think that there is a fortune for her to claim, and for Holmes to be excited enough to pursue the mystery. Next statement, Holmes carefully examined the paper given by Mary. Two things are significant about the piece of paper. First is the methodical manner in which Holmes treats that piece of paper, and second, the contents of the paper, which provide valuable clues, was decipherable by Holmes alone. The piece of paper which was found by Mary in her father's desk was unfolded carefully by Holmes. He placed it upon his knee, smoothed it out. The paper appeared to be of Indian manufacture. There were marks indicating that it had been pinned to a board for some time. The diagram on the paper appeared to be a plan of some kind. The writing was rough and coarse characters, although they appeared indecipherable. This scrap of paper appeared to be a document of great importance that had been kept carefully in a pocketbook. Returning it to Mary, Holmes urged her to preserve it carefully, as it may be of some use to them in solving the mystery at hand. Next statement. He telegraphed to me from London that he had arrived all safe and directed me to come down at once. The he in the sentence refers to Captain Morstan, father of Mary Morstan. Mary had been living alone since the death of her mother and would have been very excited at this telegram from her father asking her to meet him in London. The message from her father clearly mentions that he had arrived all safe. This sets the scene for the disappointment she feels when she finds him missing. Next statement is, I communicated with the police. The next morning we advertised in all the papers. Mary conveys this piece of information to her Holmes while narrating the story of her father's disappearance. She had responded to her father's summons to meet him at his hotel. However, when she arrived there in the morning, she was informed that her father had gone out of the previous day and had not returned. Mary then waited for him to return, and when he didn't, she communicated this to the police and advertised her father's disappearance in the newspapers. Next statement, an advertisement appeared in the Times asking for the address of Miss Mary Morstan. Many years after the disappearance of her father, when Mary was working as a governess at the home of Mrs. Forrester, she saw an advertisement in the Times requesting for her address. She responded to the advertisement, and after that, she began to receive one lustrous pearl every year in the post. Next statement, she opened a flat box and showed me 6 of the finest pearls that I had ever seen. After narrating the story of her father's disappearance and the mysterious packages she kept receiving, Mary opened the flat box that she was carrying to give Holmes as a proof of her story. Inside the box there were the finest of pearls, proving that her story was indeed true. Next statement, a curious paper was found in Mary's father's desk, which no one could understand. On their journey to Lyceum Theatre, Mary hands over a piece of paper to Holmes, which is described as curious. It was curious because no one else could understand the scribble and the markings on it, but Mary was sure that it held a clue to her father's disappearance and hence had preserved it. She shared the paper with Holmes because she felt sure that while no one could understand what was written on it, Holmes would be able to decipher its meaning. Next statement. At the Lyceum Theatre, a small, dark, brisk man accosted them. The letter which Miss Morton had received requested her to meet the writer at the Lyceum Theatre. She requested Holmes and Dr. Watson to accompany her. They expected the meeting to take place at Lyceum Theatre, but when they arrived there, they were accosted by a small dark man who was certain that the police had not been brought before spiriting them away to another location for the meeting. Next statement, our quest does not appear to take us to very fashionable regions. After the strange encounter with small dark mysterious coachman, the trio consisting of Mary, Holmes and Dr. Watson was spirited away in a hansom means horse-driven wagon, to some other location for the meeting to take place. While Dr. Watson was quite disoriented and was unable to follow the routes they were taking, Holmes was most alert and rattled off the names of the streets they were passing through. As the journey progressed, Holmes noted that they had left the elite parts of London and were now approaching the poorer, less fashionable part of the city. Next statement, the Sahib awaits you. At the end of the drive, Mary, Holmes and Watson are ushered into a house where they are met by yet another strange-looking man with oriental features. As they were beginning to think that he was the man they were to meet, he led them into another room and made the announcement that his Sahib or boss is awaiting their arrival. Next question, arrange the sentences in chronological order. So again, we have to arrange them as they appear in the lesson. First, Captain Morstan disappears. Then, the only person Captain Morstan could have visited in London was Major Sholto. Major Sholto died on 28th of April 1882. Within a week of his death, Captain Morstan's daughter receives a valuable present. And last sentence in proper sequence is, a letter is received describing Mary as a wronged woman. So this is the correct chronological order. Now let's see few questions based on the setting. Cite various references lines from the extract that tell us about the time and period of events. So first line from which we can find out the time and period is, in 1878 my father obtained 12 months leave and came home. This refers to the time when Mary's father returned on leave from the regiment which he served in India. She was called to meet him at a hotel only to find that he had disappeared. This phrase reveals the duration of leave and that her father fully expected to return to India afterwards. Within a week of Sholto's death, Captain Morstan's daughter receives a valuable present which is repeated from year to year. So this statement also tells us about the time and period. This line is the trigger that increases the intensity of the mystery. Mary's father's disappearance becomes even more mysterious when Mary begins to receive one valuable pearl every year, until the day the letter arrives. The present hints that a larger fortune awaits Mary. Next line is, no later than today, this morning I received this letter. This line is significant as it is the trigger that leads Mary to visit Holmes and request his help to unravel the mystery of her father's disappearance and the missing treasure. Next question. How does the series of action go from London to India? Explain by citing references from the extract. The answer is, the plot of the mystery is set in London, but the backstory and the intrigue is built up in far away India. As was the custom, many young men signed up with the RA and were posted in India. India, being a British colony, also held the reputation of being a very prosperous country and hence provides the perfect setting for the origin of treasure. The story begins when Mary appears at Holmes' Baker Street residence, where we are told that she enters the living room while he and Dr. Watson are engaged in conversation. She is currently employed as a government in London and has recently received a letter postmarked London summoning her to meeting at Lyceum Theatre. She requests Holmes and Dr. Watson to accompany her. In order to convince them, she gives them the background of the letter and the meeting. Mary begins to narrate her story. Her father had been posted in India and she had been sent back to London. Upon her mother's death, having no other relative, Mary was placed in a boarding establishment in Edinburgh. She is summoned to meet her father at Langham Hotel in London. It is from here that he has disappeared. An advertisement which appears in newspaper requests Mary's address, and subsequently she begins to receive a lustrous pearl of great value on a yearly basis, hinting at the presence of larger fortune. Holmes agrees to accompany her with Dr. Watson. In the meanwhile, Holmes pays visit to the Times newspaper office to ascertain some further details about the background of the case. This information is in the form of a death announcement of Major Sholto of the 34th Bombay Infantry. Major Sholto had been friend of Mary's father. He had been living in Upper Norwood, a place that the story will take us to after the meeting with Sholto's heirs, in order to recover the missing Agra treasure. Sholto and Mary's father had been friends while they were both stationed in India, in particular the Andaman Island. Jonathan Small, the man who is responsible for assisting in a murder and stealing the treasure, had met Mary's father in the Andaman Islands, where Small had been held a prisoner. Armed with the knowledge of the connection between Major Sholto's death and the pearls received by Mary, Holmes and Dr. Watson traveled to Lyceum Theatre for meeting. But the meeting does not take place at this venue. The trio is met by a coachman transferred to a hansom and hurriedly transported to a not very fashionable locality in London, where they are ushered into the home of Thaddeus by his khidmatgar. Next question. The extract begins when Mary Morstan meets Sherlock Holmes at his house. After that, Holmes, Dr. Watson and Mary visit some places in London. Explain in detail the various places mentioned in the extract. The plot, The Sign of Foe, is set in various localities in and around London. The impetus for the plot that moves the story forward are a series of incidents that took place years earlier in Agra and the Andaman Islands in India. The novella begins with Mary's visit to Sherlock Holmes' Baker Street residence in London. The mysterious letter which brought her to meet Holmes takes them to Lyceum Theatre, which turns out to be a transit point from where the trio is whisked away in a carriage through the streets of London to a poorer neighborhood where the meeting will finally take place. Next question. Basically, the setting of the extract is in London, but it has some reference of India too. Explain how the setting of the extract contribute to the theme of the novel. The plot of the novella is set in London. It begins with the meeting between Miss Mary Morstan and private detective Sherlock Holmes. However, the mystery and the intrigue of the story is provided by the disappearance of Mary's father and the receipt of 6 lustrous, expensive pearls. Mary's father had been attached to the Bombay Regiment in India. He had been posted to guard the prisoners on the Andaman Island where he met Jonathan Small. This proves to be the beginning of the association which will only bring bad luck, death and imprisonment to the involved. The treasure itself originates from Agra and amounts to ill-gotten gains. It is the Indian connection which adds mystery to the already intricate plot of the story. Next question. Describe in brief importance of the following places in the extract. First place is London. The plot of novella is set in London. Holmes lives on Baker Street in London along with his roommate Dr. Watson. We first learn of the mystery when Mary Morstan visits home and requests his help. As the story unfolds, Mary requests Holmes and Dr. Watson to accompany her to the Lyceum Theatre in the heart of the London. The trio is then driven to a poorer neighborhood in London where the meeting eventually takes place. Second place is Lyceum Theatre. It is significant because even though Mary has been summoned to the theatre, the meeting does not take place in or near the Lyceum Theatre. It serves as a central point of contact from the trio of Mary, Holmes and Dr. Watson are spirited away in a carriage by 2 anonymous men to another undisclosed location where the meeting will take place. This deepens the mystery. Next place is Edinburgh. We learn that Mary had lived in a comfortable boarding establishment in Edinburgh following the death of her mother, since she had no other relative and her father had been posted in Regiment of India. Next place is Agra. Although there is nothing in the given extract to indicate the significance of Agra, the plot itself revolves around the missing treasure of great value which is referred to simply as the Agra treasure. Next place is Andaman Islands. There is no mention of the Andaman Islands in this extract. However, the meeting which Mary is summoned to leads them to the unraveling of the mystery of the missing treasure, whose dark and threatening journey began with a murder on the Andaman Islands where Mary's father had been stationed. His meeting with Jonathan Small, who had aided 3 Arabs in committing a murder, culminated in his own death. Now let's see few questions based on theme. Write in brief the theme of the extract. The theme of The Sign of 4 revolves around a treasure from Agra in India. The existence of the treasure drives the plot of the story. Its appearance results in tragic outcomes for those who come into contact with it. The removal of treasure is essential for the lives of the characters to return to their previous position or previous normalcy. Mary Morstan, a young and charming woman, approaches the private detective Sherlock Holmes to find the stolen Agra treasure and solve the mystery of her father's disappearance. She believes herself to be the heiress to the father's fortune. Dr. Watson, Holmes' partner and roommate, is attracted to Mary but is prevented from proposing to her in case she thinks he is after her money. When it is discovered as the story unfolds that the treasure no longer exists, Watson can comfortably ask for Mary's hand in marriage. The pervading concept of destructive nature of wealth and greed is clearly visible in the story. The Agra treasure is one way or other affects almost every character in the story. Bartholomew and the Sheikh's emissary are murdered for the treasure, while Tonga is killed while attempting to flee after having stolen the treasure. Small, on the other hand, is sentenced to life imprisonment. When it is established that the treasure has disappeared, Small is a convict who commits murder in order to get hold of the treasure. Thaddeus and his father Major Sholto, because of their early experiences with the treasure, remain paranoid and fearful of strangers, and in particular a man with a wooden leg. Unlike most of Doyle's other detective stories, The Sign of Four provides us with romance in the background through romantic conflict for Watson, whose attraction for Mary cannot be fulfilled. Next question, write in 4 to 5 sentences about meeting of Miss Morstan with Holmes. At first, when Miss Morstan is ushered into Holmes' living room, he is unimpressed by her since she appeared to be someone of limited means. Miss Morstan offers the reference of her employer, Mrs. Forrester, who had been highly impressed when Holmes had helped unravel a domestic complication. Holmes is dismissive of Miss Morstan's praise for having solved the Forresters' case, but he becomes very attentive and rubbing his hands and leaning forward in his chair with concentration to listen to the details of Mary's case. Holmes declares this mystery to be very unique and strange one and describes Mary as a model client for her ability to provide such a clear explanation of the details of the case. Next question, write the central idea of the extract of the novel The Sign of Four. The central idea of the given extract provides the setting of the novella. We have chapters 2 and 3 which clearly outline the setting of the story and introduce the reader to the main plot. The events leading to the disappearance of Mary Morstan's father and the mystery behind the precious pearls that Mary has been receiving after that are presented to us as the foundation on which the mystery plays out. The extract also provides us with the hint of romance between Mary Morstan and Dr. Watson, which will end in a proposal of marriage. Holmes' reaction to the details of the case reveals his own personality as well as his capacity as a detective. Give reason. Miss Morstan plans to meet Sherlock Holmes because she wants to request his help in resolving the mystery of the letter summoning her to a meeting. Next statement, Miss Morstan gives the reference to Mrs. Cecil Forrester because Mrs. Forrester had been very impressed by the fact that Holmes had helped resolve a little domestic complication. Next is its singular case. This statement is said because Holmes refers to the disappearance of Mary's father and the fact that even his luggage had disappeared, leaving no clue, being as a very strange indeed. Holmes needed some references. The statement is said because Sherlock Holmes needed references since his first impression of Miss Morstan was not very convincing. She appeared to be a woman of limited means, judging by the way she was dressed. In fact, even after mentioning her employer, Mrs. Forrester, who had been helped by Holmes when he had solved a case involving a domestic complication, Holmes was still not very convinced. However, he was convinced when she mentioned that her case was more strange and utterly inexplicable than that of Mrs. Forrester's, and Holmes eagerly leaned forward to hear more details of her case. Next statement is Miss Morstan received a pearl every year. This pearl is important because of its immense value and the hint that it carries a promise of there being many more such pearls. Mary feels that she is an heiress since the pearls indicate the presence of a larger, more valuable fortune awaiting her. Next statement, Coachman confirmed that neither Miss Mostyn's companion was a police officer. The letter which summoned Mary clearly stated that she should not involve the police in this matter. When the trio arrive at Lyceum Theatre, the coachman waiting there confirms that Mary has followed the instructions, and after ascertaining that they are not police, he escorts them to the next stage of the journey. Miss Mostyn meets Sherlock Holmes. Mary meets Holmes to request him to accompany her to the meeting. At the same time, she expects him to solve the mystery of her father's disappearance and to find missing treasure. I waited all day without news of him. This statement is said because Mary is called to meet her father at Langham Hotel. When she reaches there, she is informed that her father had gone out the night before and had not returned yet. Mary waited all day, but there was no sign of her father, neither was there any news of him. Next statement, you are wronged woman. You are a wronged woman and shall have justice. The wronged woman here is Mary. This statement is mentioned by the letter writer. The writer calls her for meeting by promising her justice because she has been wronged, denied her rightful fortune. Last statement, Holmes took his revolver from his drawer and slipped it into his pocket. As the trio were about to set out for the meeting, Holmes puts his revolver into his pocket as he understands that there might be grave danger ahead. Let's see a few questions on language. Elaborate the following lines in the light of novella The Sign of Foe. You really are an automation, a calculating machine. Dr. Watson refers to Sherlock as an automation, a calculating machine, highlighting Holmes' inability to feel emotion. Holmes come across as cold, emotionless and calculating individual, focused entirely on case itself, with no regard for the feeling of the people involved. This description also provides a sharp contrast to the sensitive and emotional side of Dr. Watson. The letter speaks of giving her justice. What justice can she have? The letter which Miss Mostyn has received refers to the grave injustice that has been done to her and promises her compensation. However, the letter has been sent 6 years too late. What compensation can be good enough for Mary at this stage is what Dr. Watson implies when he speaks about the above phrases. The only thing that can be befitting compensation was that Mary's father would be found to be alive, but this was impossible and hence there is no justice possible for Mary. Next statement is, our quest does not appear to take us very fashionable regions. On their way to Lyceum Theatre to the meeting, Dr. Watson, our narrator, describes the route they have taken. He himself feels confused and disoriented, but Sherlock Holmes is very observant and keenly aware of the streets that they are passing. Holmes even rattles off the names of the streets and then comments that they seem to be passing out of the city and into the suburbs, which don't seem to be very fashionable region. Their meeting, it seems, will take place in a poorer neighborhood of London. Following are some dialogues of major characters. We have to tell who the speaker is, to whom the dialogue is spoken, its style, significance, etc. First dialogue is, you have once enabled my employer, Mrs. Cecil Forrester, to unravel a little domestic complication. She was much impressed by your kindness and skill. This is spoken by Miss Mary Mostyn to Sherlock Holmes. Mary's tone is hesitant and nervous, yet she is trying hard to compose herself and convince Holmes to assist her in solving the case. Next is, you will, I am sure, excuse me. This is spoken by Dr. Watson to Mary Mostyn. Dr. Watson feels embarrassed as he sees himself as an intruder, while Mary discusses details of the case with Holmes. He is gracious enough to request to be excused. Mary, however, stops him. This incident leads Dr. Watson to get emotionally attached to Mary. Next statement is, dialogue is, Your statement is most interesting. Has anything else occurred to you? Is spoken by Sherlock Holmes to Mary Morstan. The tone of this statement is curious and eager. Holmes is intrigued by the mystery and is eager to get to know more about what Mary thought about the pearls being sent to her. Next dialogue is, are you the parties who come with Miss Morstan? This dialogue is spoken by a small, dark, brisk man in the dress of a coachman. To the trio, Miss Morstan, Holmes and Dr. Watson. The tone of this statement is dark and almost threatening. Since the speaker is not known to the trio, yet the speaker is polite and mysterious. Next dialogue is, the Sahib awaits you. The Khidmatgar, that is the servant, to the trio, Miss Morstan, Holmes and Dr. Watson. The tone of this statement is formal and slightly intimidating, especially since the Khidmatgar has oriental features. This adds to the intrigue of the meeting. With this, we come to an end to the brainstorming region. So, happy reading. Do go through the extract and also try to read the novel to enjoy it completely. See you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.